You know, when we think about the origins of the Second World War, our minds usually jump straight to, well, the dates, the massive troop movements, and those endless political speeches. But in this explainer, we're going to reframe that history entirely. Because honestly, the origins of this conflict aren't just some dry timeline of military strategy. They actually read way more like a dark psychological thriller. We're talking about a chilling story built on bruised egos, terrifying deception, and honestly, some of the most epic backstabbing in modern history.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp just how bizarre the lead-up to WWI was, we kind of have to contrast it with the First World War. WWI effectively started with a bumbling assassination and this tangled web of stubborn royal cousins. It was almost a tragicomedy of errors. But World War II? Oh no, this was heavily calculated villainy. Behind the scenes, the gossip and the drama were just completely wild. It was a staged psychological thriller that started from an incredibly unexpected, almost unbelievable place.
Act 1. The ego. The ultimate butterfly effect. It's almost incredulous to think about, but the deadliest conflict in human history actually traces its roots back to a struggling teenager who just desperately wanted to be a bohemian artist. Let's walk through this timeline of early rejection for a second. Before Adolf Hitler was a fascist dictator, he was just a young man applying to the really prestigious Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. In 1907, he passed the initial exam, but the admissions board rejected him. Actually, scratch that, they didn't just reject him, they noted his drawings lacked any real appreciation for the human form and suggested he was better suited for architecture. The problem with that? He dropped out of secondary school. He literally didn't have the academic credentials to study architecture. He applied again in 1908 and was flat out rejected a second time. This led to years of him just scraping by, living in homeless shelters and selling cheap watercolor postcards to tourists just to survive.
But that failure had profound consequences. It was precisely in this bitter, impoverished environment of Vienna's streets that things took a very dark turn. Surrounded by poverty and rejection, his worldview began to warp. His extreme nationalism and anti-Semitism began to rapidly radicalize. The sheer hostility of his environment directly fueled a dark ideology that would, shockingly soon, consume the entire globe.
Which leaves us with this massive, mind-bending historical question. What if? What if a single admissions officer in Vienna had just allowed a mediocre painter to study landscapes in 1907? It's a staggering tragedy to consider, isn't it? By simply letting one art student pass, the deadliest conflict in human history and the unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust might have been entirely avoided. But as we know, history didn't go that way. The artist became a dictator, and his bruised ego needed a war.
Act 2. The deception. The macabre false flag. Now, what's really interesting about this is how things escalate when we fast forward to August 1939. Hitler is ready to invade Poland, right? But he can't just attack unprovoked. He needs a massive PR spin and a victim narrative to keep Britain and France out of his way. His solution was an incredibly grim theatrical production. On the night of August 31, 1939, German SS operatives literally dressed up in Polish military uniforms. Step 2. They stormed a German radio station in the border town of Gleiwitz, and they broadcast a short anti-German message in Polish just to claim the station was taken over. But for step 3, they needed to make the scene look totally convincing to the international press. They needed physical evidence of an attack. They needed bodies.
And the reality of how they got those bodies is horrifying. They took actual concentration camp inmates. They murdered them, dressed them in Polish uniforms, and scattered them around the radio station as props. The SS grimly referred to these murdered victims by the codename Konserve, which literally translates to canned goods. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. It is a chilling detail that reveals the sheer, macabre villainy at play before the actual war had even officially started.
And the craziest part? It worked. The very next morning, Hitler stood at a podium, gave a furious speech claiming that Poland had attacked Germany, and he used this entirely staged, gruesome radio raid as his official, legal justification to invade. It's an absolutely vital takeaway for us. World War II officially began over a completely fabricated crime scene. Just a total lie.
Act 3. The Betrayal. The Frenemy Backstab.
And this brilliantly illustrates where the explainer shifts into high political drama. As the war brewed, the two biggest ideological enemies on the planet were fascist Germany and the communist Soviet Union. Hitler and Joseph Stalin absolutely loathed each other. But in August 1939, to the utter horror of the global community, they shocked the world by signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Now, the public story was simple, a strict non-aggression agreement. They basically promised not to fight each other. But the secret gossip,
The reality entirely hidden from the public eye was a literal map. Hitler and Stalin drew a line straight down the middle of Eastern Europe, making a secret pact to carve up Poland and other neighboring countries between them like a cake.
But of course, you really can't trust a dictator with a bruised ego. The inevitable backstab was coming, and man, it came fast. In June 1941, Hitler completely shattered the pact. He launched Operation Barbarossa, sending this massive, unprovoked wave of German tanks just rolling right across the Soviet border in a devastating surprise invasion.
You know what's crazy here? There is an incredible piece of dramatic irony. As the saying goes, everyone knew tyrants made bad friends, but Stalin genuinely seemed to believe Hitler would keep his word. Think about that. Stalin, a notoriously paranoid man who trusted almost no one, actually thought Hitler would honor their secret handshake.
So when Stalin was finally informed that German forces were pouring into his territory, his reaction was staggering. According to Soviet insiders, the betrayal absolutely shattered him. He was in such a profound state of disbelief and shock that he retreated to his country house, his dacha, locked the doors, and reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown for several days. During this absolute crisis of a timeline, with their leader completely out of commission, the Soviet military was left completely paralyzed while German forces just relentlessly advanced.
We so often remember this war for its massive battles, the shifting front lines, and obviously the staggering human cost. But as we've seen throughout this explainer, the spark that ignited all that destruction was deeply personal and incredibly bizarre. So I'll leave you with this final question to chew on. How did the deadliest war in history ultimately stem from a single bruised ego in Vienna, a terrifying theatrical deception, and the catastrophic arrogance of dictators trying to out-villain one another? It just goes to show you, sometimes the most catastrophic events in human history don't actually begin on a battlefield. They begin in the dark corners of human psychology.